Thank you so much for being here. The funny thing is, the last time I was giving a conference talk, my talk was also, it just happened to be at 4 o'clock as well. That was in August at Hyderabad. So yeah, that was the last talk of the day. I mean, the previous conference which I was speaking at. So I, asked the folks to just, get energized a bit. So I hope that's not required. I'm not going to torture you, ask you to stand up and stretch. That's okay, right? You're all awake. All right, cool. Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, by the way. So I'm not going to bore you with the details. I work at AWS. Mainly work with Golang, the programming language, databases, and of course Kubernetes. So I'm going to throw more Kubernetes at you after the the last interesting session on operators, which I also love a lot. So yes, I do work on Kubernetes, and I'm assuming I saw the room. Some of you lifted your hands when you had the question, who works with Kubernetes in any capacity. So you folks work with Kubernetes, right? I'm assuming ops, developer, any capacity. I see a few nodding heads, but okay, cool. Yeah, a fair capacity of the room, I think, maybe 20-30%. All right. Yeah, I work with Kubernetes. And by the way, the picture in this background in the meme is this CNCF landscape, right? CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which hosts a lot of the cloud native projects, not just Kubernetes, a lot of projects around cloud native ecosystem, right? And this is what I typically try to represent to the recruiters, at least when I say I work with Kubernetes, tons of open source projects, so on and so forth. So I love doing that. But then the question is, really, sometimes my friends and colleagues ask me as well, dude, really, do you work with Kubernetes? And I guess the reason for it, partially, not completely, is because of this. Can anyone relate to this? Folks who work with Kubernetes, wrestling with YAML all the time, fighting YAML. I fight YAML. I mean, the funny part is I mostly end up fighting on the indentation part. I'll be honest with you, which is funny, right? Whenever I primarily use VS Code, I do a tab, everything goes to hell. So yeah, funny thing. Don't take this to heart. Just lighthearted stuff here. But then, like I said, working with Kubernetes sometimes feels like you're wrestling with YAML. You're more of a YAML engineer rather than doing your thing day by day, which you have been tasked to and you're paid for. And the reason is because YAML is kind of everywhere. It's this lingua franca of the Kubernetes ecosystem, be it operators, the session which was just happened, just concluded, or you're using perhaps GitOps, or you're using Helm or Customize, right? YAML is going to be front and center of it, right? When you're working with Kubernetes in any capacity. But what I'm going to talk to you about today in this space of around 25 minutes or so, I guess, is not about removing YAML, because to be honest with you, that's impossible. I would be selling you a pipe dream if I were to say that, hey, you know what, let's remove YAML. Not going to happen, at least not in the near future, I'm assuming. But it's more about trying to avoid it, like we usually do, or push things behind the scene, try to circumvent it using tools and platforms. And there are a bunch of them already out there. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is something called CDK, Cloud Development Kit for Kubernetes, also for short CDK8s. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. And I'm going to switch back and forth a bit between slides and a few demos. I hope that's okay. If not, let me know. I can change the pace as per how you prefer. And yeah, like I said, I have about 20-25 minutes left, right? So I possibly cannot cover everything here. So that's the reason I just thought I'll mention this. So this is kind of a mini book which I have. Bunch of chapters and associated GitHub repos as well. So you might want to refer to this later on, of course. So feel free. Pretty much everything I have here is there as well. So hopefully it will be useful to you later on. And before I dive in, I want to touch upon a couple of concepts. One is infrastructure as code, and I'm assuming you are familiar with them, right? Familiar with it, the concept of infrastructure as code. You have perhaps worked with Terraform or AWS CloudFormation. Anyone? Terraform, I'm assuming. Yeah, AWS CloudFormation. Folks working with AWS perhaps, right? So that's one side of the spectrum, so to speak, right? And the other side of the spectrum, at least from my understanding and knowledge, I don't know if there's anything in between, infrastructure as code, and there's this thing about infrastructure is code. There are tools like AWS CDK. Don't get confused between CDK and CDK8s. They're different, you'll understand that later on. CDK, CDK8s, Pulumi, perhaps there are others as well, which you might have used already. So in the infrastructure is code world, what happens is configuration takes a backseat, right? All the configuration which you typically write using a custom templating language, perhaps JSON or YAML, so they take a backseat. The code comes to the forefront, right? That is what dominates in the infrastructure is code world, and that's where this tool called CDK8s also comes into picture, because this embraces the infrastructure as code paradigm for your Kubernetes centric applications. Now, I am a Go developer, so I'm going to show you some Go examples today, so on and so forth, but then CDK8s also supports Java and Python and a bunch of other languages as well. And I think, of course, the good part is that this is an open source project. This is also a CNCF project, by the way, in case you didn't know already. And this has nothing to do with AWS. It is cloud agnostic. You can run it on your local Kubernetes cluster, pre-prod, production, whatnot, right? And I'm going to show you how it works, obviously, pretty soon. So, like I said, I'm going to switch back and forth between demos and slides a bit. I hope that's okay. If not, let me know right now. Is that cool? Some context switch? All right, cool. Thank you. Before I do that, I'll take a quick sip and switch over to my IDE. I like drinking lots of water in between. Okay, cool. So this is a cheat sheet I have on purpose, and I'm going to go into this empty directory which I have, the demo directory, all empty. So basically, what CDK8s is, it's a CLI command as well as this toolkit, right, combined into one. So the font is, yeah, this is a little better, I think. So what CDK8s is it's a CLI, like I told you. It has 3 simple commands. That's pretty much it, right? Nothing extensive. Imports, init, and synth, and I'm going to show you all of them one by one. Okay. And what I'll do is to start off with, I'll like you saw, this is a hello world demo, very 101 types, straightforward. So I'm going to initialize a project, a Go project right now, a CDK8s Go project. So I say CDK8s, please initialize a boilerplate project for me. And I say Go app. This is a specific one because this is for the Go language. It supports other languages as well. You would use different sort of keywords for that. So CDK8s init Go app. What it's going to do is initializing a project. So from nothing, it will give me something. It will give me a boilerplate where I or you or anyone else who is using it, something to start with, right? A foundation to build on. So these are the things which it generated. Don't worry about it. I'll walk through them. But the main thing here is this main.go file, right? This contains the main, your logic for the Kubernetes application. Now, when I say Kubernetes application, this is from an infrastructure point. This is not your application per se, right? Not your REST API or something that you're going to deploy. This is the CDK8s application which I'm referring to here, FYI, okay? Now, I'm going to make use of that cheat sheet, not waste your time by, trying to code here live, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to copy paste some code. I hope that's okay. And I'll talk through this as well. Copy, paste, that's the best way of doing it because we have 30 minutes, right? So what I did here is defined that application, okay? Now, before I walk you through it, I'm going to show you actually how things work. So first thing, we used CDK8s init. Now, I'm going to use another command, CDK8s synth. What it does is, at least to me, it is magic, right? A lot of magic. So what it did is just converted that source code of yours, which defined your Kubernetes, the infrastructure for your Kubernetes application, into a YAML file, right? We all love YAML. At the end of the day, it's all YAML. I'm going to come to that YAML as well. And what you can now do is just use it the way you want to. Of course, kubectl is a common one. So I'm just going to. Oh, by the way, I'm using a local Kubernetes in Docker cluster. Just FYI, it's a kind cluster, Kubernetes in Docker. So what I'm going to do is kubectl apply -f and the contents of the dist folder. So that YAML by default is stored in a folder named dist. So it created something called a deployment here, okay? Standard Kubernetes stuff. So there is, just came up, this pod came up, there is a service, and I'm going to talk you through that, and there is a deployment as well, right? So this is a hello world Nginx, the canonical, hello world of Kubernetes, right? Nginx container, which I have spun up here. And if I were to, just try and access it, kubectl, what is it, port forward, name of my service. This is just a load balancer, service, which I have here. So it is actually exposed on 9090, and I'm going to, access it on port 8080, right? Just going to show you this real quick before I explain the other stuff. Refresh my page. Hello world, Nginx. Okay, so we are able to access it. Great, right? Now let me go back and just walk you through the code real quick here. What did we do? We are using the CDK8s. Like I said, it's supported in Go, so it has an sort of client or SDK, as you might want to call it. So we are using the CDK8s Go package, and we have this concept in CDK8s of an application and a chart and so on and so forth. I'm going to come back to that, but before that, let me talk about this this copy pasta which I did here, right? What did I really do? I defined your usual deployment manifest which you write in code, right? So I have a selector, I have a label, I defined a deployment using a number of replicas, the selector, the templates. I also defined a service which happens to be of the type load balancer. This is a local cluster, so it's not going to do any magic. And that's it, right? And what did it get translated into? Like I told you, I'll walk you through the YAML as well, once the one which we like and love. So at the end of the day, this is standard Kubernetes stuff, right? Service, load balancer, and a deployment, right? So what we did was convert that code into this YAML, and then we applied it to our Kubernetes cluster. That's pretty much all we did. Now the question is, or rather another interesting question which I typically used to get earlier when I used to talk about this is as well, like where does all this come from? Like, you know, object meta, container, what's the magic which is happening? Remember in the last talk, Aditya spoke about Kubernetes clients, the co-client. You could have used that, right? You would typically use something like an operator or the raw client, Kubernetes Go client SDK to define these objects. But the good part about CDK8s is that it abstracts that from you by giving you a simple sort of a wrapper, so to speak, right? So you can just use the API layer to define your Kubernetes objects, right? So it's a layer on top of your client code. Think of it that way. It's not as simple, just for the sake of understanding, right? So just to clarify and break down, you know, the different layers of CDK8s, right? From a CLI perspective, from the way you define an application and how these APIs are sort of given to you for free by the framework or this utility or toolkit, so to speak, right? So that's sort of the CDK8s 101, so to speak, okay? What I'm going to do is make sure that I clean up for the next demo. So just making sure. All right, so I'm going to move back now to slides, context switch, like I told you earlier. Okay, so you saw 101, and this is just a recap, right? Like I briefly touched upon. So this is an important concept from a CDK8s perspective, right? It has this notion of, it's a hierarchical sort of a world here in CDK8s. So you have an app, and within an app, you can have multiple things called charts, and within this chart is where you would define your basic building blocks, say your Kubernetes deployment and a service, the example which you just saw, but it could be something else as well, right? So that's how it works. And again, this is also a recap of the end-to-end workflow. So you bootstrap a project. Typically, you would want to bootstrap it because it makes things much easier for you. You write your code, you add your application bits, the infrastructure bits, then you run it through CDK8s synth. It generates that YAML, and then you are good to go. You can use your tooling like kubectl or GitOps or whatnot, whatever you have, right? So that's the main crux of CDK8s so far. So this was 101. But like everything, CDK8s in its own way, the vanilla CDK8s is not perfect, right? There is scope for improvement. And the reason is because CDK8s is a very, very low level API. So the code which you will write, this was the example which I showed you was relatively simple, but if you write complex stuff, it is going to be much more verbose, and that is where CDK8s plus comes in. Now this example, the screenshot is directly from the documentation, and this is Node.js, by the way, right? So you look at the difference, pretty significant. But of course, this is going to differ from language to language. Of course, I'm a Go person. I'm going to show you a Go example. You might say, you know what? I mean, the lines of code, it's a minor difference, Abhishek, big deal, right? But I just want to call it out very quickly. CDK8s plus is not just about the number of lines of code or only the verbosity. And I'll show you that in a second. It's more about the abstraction. The CDK8s plus gives you a much higher level of abstraction. The API abstraction to work with gives you sort of default, very free-flowing APIs, right? So overall, there is less mental overhead. Of course, less verbosity is sort of a bonus, and as developers, we all love that, right? So that's what CDK8s plus is all about, a better version of the vanilla CDK8s library. And then there's also this notion of constructs. I would say they are an intermediate level concept, right? Not a beginner concept in CDK8s. But the idea here is that imagine if you were building something production grade, something complex within a larger scope in your organization, perhaps, or with multiple teams, and you wanted to build a component using CDK8s. And imagine every multiple teams requiring it, but everyone going around and making their own version of it, and perhaps with a slightly different configuration, right? So that's where this notion of constructs comes in. It's not a fancy, idea. It's the same as using perhaps an external library or a dependency and so on and so forth. But from a conceptually, it is very, very powerful. And there's also something called a constructs hub, where there are predefined, pre-built constructs available to you for everyone, not only by AWS, but by community and open source constructs as well, which you can directly use within your CDK8s application, right? So it's a very, very powerful concept when you extend that to a centralized sort of this hub which I'm talking about, right? So CDK8s Plus, just to quickly recap, right? From a API perspective, gives you a much higher level of abstraction, and the concept of constructs which comes in, where you can go and fetch these external components pre-built to use within your application. And just like before, I'll switch to a demo real quick and show you how this actually works. Okay. For that, first I'll show you the CDK8s Plus part. For that, I'll switch to a different piece of project which I have. And what I'm going to do is show you an example of a WordPress stack or instance on Kubernetes, right? It is kind of ubiquitous. Almost all of us have heard about WordPress. It has like two major components: MySQL, the database part, and the backend, the PHP aspect, right? So how does it look like when you define a WordPress stack using CDK8s Plus to be specific, right? So as you notice, I'm using the CDK8s Plus API, not the vanilla CDK8s, which is up here, right? I'm not using that. And I have two charts here, one for MySQL, but I just want you to quickly just understand and focus on the API bits and how it's different, right? So there is a secret, there is a password. This is just for demo. This is not how you should be defining passwords, right? So I add my string data to my secret. I have a deployment which I have defined. I added a container to that deployment. I have defined an environment value object from my secret and then I add that as an environment variable within my container. I have a persistent 5 minutes left. Nice. Okay, PVC. I guess I'll have to hurry up. I have a PVC, and the API just flows, right? And you see how then we are mounting that PVC within the container and so on and so forth. So like I was alluding to earlier, the API is much more natural. It kind of flows. Okay. So I'm going to close this and show you the concept of custom construct now that I have less time apparently. Okay. So if you were to be writing this WordPress, wouldn't it be nice for you to be able to just have this as an API call and configure your WordPress cluster and off you go, right? So that's what I have here. Again, I'm going to do some copy paste just to show you stuff, right? And this is the only part which you'll have to sort of deal with if you were to write this custom construct, which I'm going to walk you through, right? So what you just did was just focus on this part here, right? You defined a WordPress construct, and I'm going to go into this. And all you did was define the configuration. It's pretty much all you're doing. So this is my MySQL image. This is my WordPress image. This is the kind of storage I need, etc., etc., etc. And if I were to go into this custom construct, this is not very different to what I just showed you earlier. It is just that I have now, sort of combined both those charts, the MySQL and the WordPress chart, into one, and I've externalized the configuration, right? And this is just one function here, and just pay attention to the fact that it is returning a construct and not just a chart. And this construct has then been plugged into the main application where everything is sort of bootstrapped, and then you kick things off, right? So custom construct. I wanted to show you a demo, to be honest with you, but that would be just running WordPress on Kubernetes. You want to see that anyway. That's okay. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip that demo and go back to my presentation and perhaps show you another demo later on, quickly, if I can. And the last one is, this is slightly advanced concept, right? But this is the last section, CRDs. If you're paying attention, if you're listening to the operator's talk, Aditya spoke a lot about CRDs already. So I'm going to skip this part, thanks to him. But yeah, CRDs are just about extending Kubernetes with your own custom components, your custom ideas or applications and so on and so forth. So that's the idea. You can read up on it, very well documented in the Kubernetes documentation. A good example, or rather, there are lots of good examples. One of the examples is the ACK project, or the AWS controller for Kubernetes, which actually allows you to spin up and manage AWS services from Kubernetes, from kubectl, with the help of YAML, of course, right? Which is funny, because this is I promised something else. So this is example of a Amazon RDS database. You have a YAML, and then you use kubectl apply, and it's going to go ahead, create an RDS database, which you can then manage, right? And this applies to other services as well, say S3 or DynamoDB or Lambda function, so on and so forth, right? So what I'm going to talk to you about today quickly is how would you use CRDs with CDK8s, right? Because any real world project today on Kubernetes or using Kubernetes are going to use these custom resource definitions and external projects and CRD related components. In a gist, pretty much all you do is use that import command of the CDK8 CLI, point it to the CRD, which is a YAML file at the end of the day, and it's going to automatically, literally automatically generate some APIs and packages for you, irrespective of the language. I'm going to show you Go example. It's going to have those packages for you, and you can then use them in your code as if you're calling just another API, right? And then at the end of the day, you do a synthesize, convert into YAML, and you're good to go, okay? I'm going to show you a demo very, very quickly. But before that, what is that demo all about? It's a very sort of naive URL shortener application deployed on EKS, Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Cluster, using Amazon DynamoDB as the backend database. And both the application and the database has been, or rather will be defined, as you will see, using CDK8s from an infrastructure component perspective, right? And yeah, that's sort of the setup for the demo, so to speak. So I'll quickly go there, and before I do that, I'm going to switch over to my Kubernetes cluster because I was using my local cluster. Okay, and go into another thing. Okay, what I'm going to do is first quickly set up and bootstrap all the application and everything, and I'm going to use my cheat sheet here because I'm in a hurry. Okay, so what I'm going to do is first synthesize this, right? Convert, and I'm using this script here just because there are other components to this as well. So I'm going to synthesize this. It converted, it made a couple of YAML files here, just usual stuff. And what I'm going to do is now create a DynamoDB table, but not using AWS CLI or the console or so on and so forth. I'm going to do it using this sort of integration which I have here. But before that, I'm going to show you that the DynamoDB table, of course, it does not exist. The name is URLs demo, of course, not found, expected. Now what I'm going to do is create it, right? So I simply do a kubectl apply and create it using that first YAML which I have 0000. I'm going to show you that real quick, but before let me create it, right? Don't worry about the last three parts. They are used in the ACK project. But yeah, for now, just worry about or rather focus on the DynamoDB part. Oops, I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to show you that hopefully the DynamoDB table should come up now. Boom, real time. Okay, so I have the table ready. Now I'm going to create the application as well, which is the Kubernetes deployment and so on and so forth. Quickly going to create that. And the reason why I did this earlier is because I have a load balancer that service which I'm going to create. It's going to spin up a load balancer. It's going to take a bit of time. So I'll walk you through the other stuff while that's ready. So that's why I did this. So that's that. While some of the magic happens at the back end, I'm going to quickly run you through the application. Very similar to things which you have seen earlier, but I just want you to focus on this part. And this is the API package which I was alluding to earlier. How did I actually do that? I did it in advance by using these commands. Okay, so I did CDK8s import on a couple of custom resource definitions. Forget about the second one. Think about the first one. Just focus on the first one. This is the ACK project custom resource definition for DynamoDB. As you can see, this is of the kind table and DynamoDB and so on and so forth, right? So this is in response. So all this API was generated for us in response to that CDK8s import action, right? And now I'm able to use that just as any other package or dependency within my application. And if I were to scroll down and show you a couple of charts where I've used them, so I'm just using this package, right? I'm creating a new DynamoDB table and I'm passing multiple configuration attributes. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but that's I just want to give you a sense of how it is, right? And if I were to scroll down, of course, there's the deployment chart as well, which takes care of the deployment and the service and so on and so forth, right? So that's the sort of high-level overview of the application. And if you were to look into the YAML itself for the DynamoDB table, so like you see, this is of the kind table. The same things which we specified in our code, of course, are going to reflect here as well. And the ACK controller, the AWS controller for Kubernetes, which is installed on my Kubernetes cluster, sort of responds to this, and then it spins up a DynamoDB table and so on and so forth. And of course, the application as well, like I said, nothing fancy here. There is a service and there is my URL shortener deployment on EKS. Okay. Now, finally, because I've showed you all this, let me run the application as well. No harm in doing that, of course. So I have, like I said, this is going to be exposed via a load balancer, a classic load balancer. So this is that URL. And if I were to go ahead and use this, yeah, so this is that. And so I'm using the APIs of my service, which is deployed and accessible, the REST API, through that URL. So I was able to create a short code for this long URL which I gave here, right? So that's that. And if I were to try and access that using curl, first of all, I'll use curl and slash the short code, just like bit.ly, nothing fancy, just excuse me, copy pasta. You all love that. Okay, so just like bit.ly, so what happened is that in response I got a 302 found and with a location header. So it's going to, if I were to actually try this in my browser, actually, let me get the URL for that first. So that's going to make much more sense to you, right? So because what you're seeing is the HTTP stuff here. So yeah, I mean it's a bit.ly kind of a thing, bit.ly, the short URL, and boom, that was the long URL which was initially which I had specified earlier, right? So that's that. Yeah, so like I said, just to sum it up quickly, going back to the slide here, URL shortener application, but the main point here is the infrastructure aspect, right, which was handled and sort of spun up using CDK8s and the combination of kubectl. Wrapping up now, short and sweet. So what was this about? Just some takeaways for you. So this is not about removing YAML, definitely. This is about less YAML and perhaps combining sort of CDK8s or tools like CDK8s with other components like constructs and so on and so forth. And this is about using, well, the programming languages which you like and love with, to write your infrastructure application. And that's that. You can download the slide deck here if you're interested. And CDK8s application has good documentation and GitHub repository with examples. So I hope you find that useful. And that's that. Thank you. I don't think I have time, but I'll take questions later on here.